Hello there. And okay, we're gonna do this. Welcome back to another episode of Nerd Remembers. And in this episode, I remember a little series called Smallville. This is another instance of an origin story for a well-known superhero, but this one did it a little different. Not completely different to what had been done before, but it took the mythology, expanded it, went in its own direction, created a few new characters, and generally kind of did its own thing. Some people love it, some people hate it, some people are down the middle. The show did have its problems, but it also had a lot of good things going on in it. We're going to explore some of these in this today, but I don't want to sit here just tearing the show apart for all the not so great that was also happening in the show. So let's just get started on what exactly was Smallville. The show, of course, centered around a young Clark Kent before he really knew he was going to be Superman. His powers had not yet fully developed, and it implied in the show that many of his powers would actually only really develop around puberty. He already had the speed, the strength, and the relative indestructibility, but he wasn't even entirely bulletproof at this point. Although, they didn't kill him, but they left him with a nasty series of bruises. The show starred Tom Welling in the role of Clark Kent. It had Michael Rosenbaum as a standout character. Many fans agree across the board in the DC fandom that in the adaptations of Lex Luthor on television and in movies, Michael Rosenbaum's is certainly at the very least one of the standouts for me personally, possibly the greatest Lex Luthor. I also kind of liked John Shee from the New Adventures of Superman, who I may have just mispronounced his name incorrectly, so I apologize if I did. Gene Hackman was one thing. Let's not talk about the other one. But I think Lex Luthor, portrayed here by Michael Rosenbaum, definitely a standout. We had Kristen Kruk, who played Lana Lang, the young love interest. The rather stunning Erica Durance playing Lois Lane, Annette O'Toole, who was famous for actually playing the original Lana Lang, John Schneider as his father, Justin Hartley as Oliver Queen, and a created character for the show, Chloe Sullivan, who was a stand-in for Lois Lane in the earlier seasons, turned out to be Lois Lane's cousin, portrayed by Alison Mack. We also had a number of recurring guest characters that were season by season, sometimes would pop up here and there, such as Sam Jones III playing Pete Ross, his then best friend. We had, of course, Lionel Luthor, Lex's rather evil father, played by the always delightful John Glover, who this was basically clearly a descendant of his original company, Clamp Cable Network, that he founded in the 1980s, before there was a minor gremlin infestation and he had to reinvent himself into being Lionel Luthor. But that's its all other conspiracy theory. We had a number of other amazing characters, some of them rather confusing, like the portrayal of Jimmy Olsen. This is a show that was ran from 2001 to 2011. This is going to have spoilers. They kill Jimmy Olsen and then they bring him back, played by basically the Ashmore twins that I only learned from watching the show were even twins. And it was his then nephew who was Jimmy, and the original Jimmy wasn't his name. And anyway, then you had Cassidy Freeman playing Tess Mercer, who, spoilers again, turned out to be Lex Luthor's half-sister. Lara Vandervoot, who played Kara El, who was, of course, his biological cousin, that being Clark Kent's biological cousin back from Krypton. We had Whitney Fordman, who was kind of his bully and antagonist in the early seasons, got a bit of a redemption, but in my opinion got a very sucky ending to his character. His final episode that he even appears in, the actor playing the character isn't even technically playing him, he's playing someone else who's a shapeshifter portraying him, and we'll get to the shapeshifter part in a moment. We had Terrence Stamp as Jor-El, Jensen Ackles, originally actually someone considered to play Clark Kent in original casting, but ultimately didn't get the part. Callum Blue, who I think was awfully miscast as Zod, as I never personally found him particularly intimidating, and he never had the gravitas of someone such as Terrence Stamp. I know they wanted a younger Zod, but still, he never had it. It's like you can listen to Terrence Stamp talk, and you pay attention, you listen. That man has a booming, amazing voice. And Callum Blue kind of puts me to sleep. No offense to the actor, he can't help that. That's just his voice, and it's my personal sort of take on it. I just hated him as Zod. He just was absolutely terrible. Of course, there were many other characters that pop up, other love interests for Clark, such as you obviously had Lana Lang, then you get Lois Lane. Lots of LLs going on here. Almost makes you wonder about Lex, actually, there, Lex Luthor. There was a number of others, but yeah, they introduce different types of kryptonite in the show. They go down all the usual routes, and this show is powers developing. Now, I personally really like the show. A lot of people say about the earlier seasons that it was very episodic. I mean, all shows have that. The first couple of seasons, they're finding their feet, they're finding the characters. Even if it's a well-established franchise, you reinvent it, you make it your own, and people complain about all of the sort of almost monster of the week, where all these people get powers and they then abuse them, they become monsters. They show that kryptonite is no longer just something that affects Clark. It actually it weakens him, of course, and could potentially kill him. But on humans and on plants and things domestic to Earth, it can give them powers, it can make them stronger. I mean, actually, in the comics, I'm not a huge DC fan personally. I love Batman, but I'm not a massive DC fan. I'm more of a Marvel person. Grew up reading the X-Men comics, things like that. But yeah, from what I've skimmed, and I just skimmed, so forgive me here, my knowledge is a little vague, but I know it's in there somewhere in the old DC canon, that actually there are planets that when humans go to them, the radiation from the sun gives humans superpowers, not unlike those of a Kryptonian. And on that, I want to share a theory about Kryptonians, right? Kryptonian star is red. Now I get it, the yellow sun gives them powers, but their bodies must inherently have these things in them to begin with, right? It doesn't make sense. I mean, that thing about the humans is, it's like it's one comic. It's almost throwaway. But it always thought to me, it's like, well, if it's a red giant, it may have started out its life as a Type A star, not unlike ours, and a yellow sun. So they were photosynthesizing or whatever powers from that. Were the entire Kryptonian race at one point superpowered like that? But over millions of years, as their sun changed and the radiation from it changed, they lost those abilities? Because they clearly picked Earth for a reason. They sent Clark to Earth. They sent their son to Earth because they know, like, he's going to get really, really powerful. And then they imply as well, back onto the actual show, Jor-El seems to be trying to guide Clark to rule the human race, to conquer them. And it really leans into this. It's obviously subterfuge a little bit. It's a misnomer, but it's not played that way at all. It is fully played like that is exactly what Jor-El wanted his son Kal-El to do. And even when he at one point kind of becomes the son that he wanted, he's like, his mind is altered and he ends up being that way, he becomes almost a conqueror. He becomes a killer. And you see an alternate, not a killer, sorry, that's wrong. He becomes basically very dark. And then you see an alternative version of him in another universe in later seasons where he was actually raised by the Luthors and he was that way. The show in these early seasons particularly was, as I said, people find it episodic, but I actually kind of like the idea of I mean, who else is going to challenge him? You can't really have him go instantly up against Lex or Brainiac or anyone like that, or Doomsday, any of his major enemies, which we will get to right off the bat. But you could have him face off against sort of low-level villains, some of which were based on actual comic book villains, others were not, and generally most of them were just made up. I do dislike that it makes out that every human that gets any kind of power is going to be evil, and I sometimes disliked how black and white Clark viewed the world. He was also a little bit, and this may be a controversial take, he's a little bit of an incel in these earlier seasons. He's very much like, I like this girl, she should like me back. I know better than these people, so I've got powers, they can't have them, they can't handle them, so they need to do as they're told and fall into line. He's very much like that, and I disliked it. Also, John Schneider, who played his father, Jonathan Kent, fantastic actor, played the role really well, and I know a lot of people see them as like the perfect on-screen couple, Martha and Jonathan Kent. They are wonderful, and he plays the role really well, and he is a very good representation of a very loving and dedicated parent. But even then, sometimes it's like, well, he doesn't want Martha to have a job. He's so caught up in his own ego that he can't handle the idea of not being the big male provider of the household. And it is something of an old-fashioned view for a 21st century show that I did find a little weird. Nonetheless, it's not a big negative to the show, but it was something I used to pick up on. I even did a short about it once. But generally speaking, overall, the characters are all really well done, but it's like they didn't really know what to do with it. They had the framework they wanted. And we're going to get to Lex in a moment, but generally the characters, as I said, you had Chloe Sullivan, who was a Lois Lane stand-in. Semi-love interest, but there was never, because she was probably not originally destined to be Lois's cousin, but they wrote that in at some point. They were never really going to have Clark be with her, but they would have her be interested in him, because of course she would be. But he would be continuing to be obsessed with Lana and not really be able to see anyone else. Pete, his other best friend, would feel pushed out when Lex comes into his life. In the first episode, Clark saves Lex's life, and Lex becomes obsessed with exactly how Clark managed it. Now, there is a good argument to make that this early version of Lex was already a little too far gone to ever really be saved, but he wasn't so far gone. We really liked him. We wanted Lex to do the right thing, and in every episode he was always opposing his father, opposing doing evil. He always wanted to do the best for his employees. He was magnanimous. He was altruistic. He was a lovely man. He was a good friend to Clark and everybody else. But you could see the early creepings of darkness inside him, the obsessiveness, the secretiveness, the lust for power that ultimately would define Lex Luthor as a person was already there, but he was not born with it. When you see him earlier, when you see him younger, you see it was put into him. It wasn't until it was retconned a little bit later in later seasons where they ruined his character, in my opinion, where they had it made out that he was deceiving everyone all along, which obviously it's Lex Luthor could believe it. But Lex Luthor is a more complicated character, and this is why Michael Rosenbaum played him so well in those early seasons. Lex was never an out-and-out villain. Stay with me. Lex saw Superman in a way that perhaps others didn't. Yes, Lex could be a criminal. He was a lot of things that weren't good. But he perceived Superman as creating many of the elements that he was fighting. The very end, a bit like Batman, he almost created the enemies that he ended up having to fight. Not only that, Superman was so powerful. Yes, he was good, but even bad people do good things, and good people do bad things. Lex is a prime example, a bad person who occasionally does good. There's no way that no matter how much of a Boy Scout Superman is, he's perfect. He will do bad, and it's all about degrees. Lex was always concerned that what if Superman didn't embrace the American way, he didn't embrace truth, justice, and liberty for all, and decided on, I know best. You can't have powers. I have powers. You can't handle them, and you need to fall into line. I like you. You need to like me back. You don't have a choice in this. My way is the right way. You don't get to make determinations of your own right of self-determination. You can't have nuclear missiles. You can't be trusted with technology. So I'm going to take it from you. What if he did these things? Who was to stop him? And that's what Lex was really worried about. And yes, does he go too far with everything? Of course. But he is ultimately a villain. He is the antagonist. But there is a side of Lex that is shades of grey. And Michael Rosenbaum played this character fully in the shades of grey. In the early seasons, he was good. It's only when they, again, in my opinion, ruined his character later on with this ridiculous storyline of him marrying Lana Lang, faking a pregnancy, that even outraged his father. Because it's like, if you wanted her pregnant, just get her pregnant, basically. It's like, what are you doing? He was basically ruined as a character, which is probably why Michael Rosenbaum left the show. I'm not sure that's entirely... I don't know if that's true, but I'm willing to bet that it probably is. I know he came back for the fans in the final season. But let's actually circle away from Lex for a moment. Lex was a fantastic character, and go back to actually Clark Kent himself. Tom Welling, fabulous portrayal. I do say, right, as much as I've just said a couple of things that I think are a bit negatives of his character, overall, the farm boy charm, the somewhat pleasant demeanor and always kind of reserved, always towing the line, but also exploring his powers, learning where that line is, sometimes crossing it, but pulling himself back, never wanting to hurt anyone, always trying to do the right thing. Sometimes it was an imposition, he would impose himself, but he was always on the side of angels. He was always trying to be good. He was trying to be a good friend. You could argue that the fact that he was always lying to people is what drove Lex further and further away from him and made him more and more of an antagonist. But Tom Welling's portrayal of this character made him very amicable. He was a very affable character. He was very likable. Tom Welling is very likable. He's also a gigantic human being. And he is very much, he embodies what you imagine a young Superman or Clark Kent to be. Of course, he had to learn a lot of things. It took Lois Lane actually telling him he needs to start being more of a klutz and less of an alpha male, basically, to really distance himself from the Superman persona, basically making Clark Kent the costume and Superman the real person. He had to be larger than life because he was a symbol. And it shows, I think, very well through the early and mid seasons, this progression. But the show does go off the deep end in the later seasons, when the showrunners left and were replaced, and Michael Rosenbaum left. Particularly the last, I'd say, 2 seasons, his character suffers a little bit as the Blur, and you bring in elements like the Justice League, all played by fantastic actors, and a lot of it is good. But there is something less well thought out and less sort of well dressed and sharp. The early seasons, yeah, people complain about them being episodic. People complain about Lana Lang, which we're going to do next. But a lot of the time, the actual characters are well done. And they're likable, and they knew what they were doing with them. It's only seemed to be in, like I say, the later seasons, you reach them and you go, what were you thinking? What did you do there? Why? What the hell? And you end up with these kind of bloated ghosts of their former selves. And it explores a lot of deep and meaningful themes, which we won't all completely go into, such as suicidal tendencies, which is a very, very real problem that a lot of people face. And the show tackles those things, and it tackles them head on, and it does try to send the message of hope and good that Superman is meant to embody for all people all over the world, and it does that very well. And again, in those early seasons in particular, it shows Lex as a very dynamic and very much a shades of grey person. Certainly envious of Clark and how he is with his family, because Lionel didn't care about Lex the same way. For various reasons, but it stemmed from him believing that Lex had killed his younger brother when he was a child. Turns out he hadn't. He'd covered for his mother, because Lex believed that Lionel would have killed his mother if he'd have found out that she had killed the baby. And she was basically suffering from postpartum depression. Again, a subject that the show handled really well and spread this storyline out really well. So all the Lex stuff is really good. All the Superman stuff is really good. His parents are done really well. So what about the friend circle, the peripheral characters? Again, we've got Pete. And Pete was a very underutilized character who was a good idea, but they completely screwed him up as it went along. And then when they brought him back to give his character some closure, they brought him back with stupid Stretch Armstrong powers and some weird, again, kryptonite-infused bubblegum that was making him powerful. It was so stupid. So much of a waste of that character. And the way they had him exit the show was like he was spitting his dummy up because he couldn't handle Clark's secrets and etc, etc. They tried to do something else with him and they just realized they couldn't do anything with his character. It's a shame, but also it was understandable that it was simply the direction they were going, and Chloe was a much better stand-in. She had the better storylines, often better storylines than a lot of the other characters had, Lex or Clark. But before we get to her, let's get to Lana, the main love interest. Now, a lot of people's complaints about Lana, I actually, personally, I'm going to say I agree with. She was a character who was, again, not very well used. She wasn't well written. She was whiny, complained. She basically came with her own ransom note, to quote Velma from Scooby-Doo. When talking about Daphne, awesome film. I need to cover that one day. But, yeah, everyone was obsessed with her, which was insane. It's like, how can one girl have so many people obsessed with her? Who does she think she is? Christina Ricci? By the way, if Christina Ricci ever watches this, Yeah. Lifelong crush. Just gonna say this out there. Such an amazing actress. So beautiful. I'm getting off topic, but I don't care. Christina Ricci's awesome. Like for Christina Ricci, by the way. Anyway, the show overall did not treat Lana Lang very well. She had that stupid storyline of marrying Lex. Now, I will say that once she figured things out, she became a true Luthor. She became Lana Luthor. That character was far more interesting than Lana Lang. Lana Lang was boring. Every guy wanted her. Most of the girls also wanted her. And don't get me wrong, Kristen Karuk is stunning. She is a beautiful, beautiful woman. And I can understand people being attracted to her. But obsessed? And everybody, including Clark, I should point out, was also pretty obsessed. Was a little hard to swallow at times. It was not as believable as a lot of the other storyline. I mean, she wasn't that epic. I'm sorry, I don't mean in a physical way. I just mean she was like... It was also hard to comprehend that a schoolgirl, and she was a schoolgirl, I should point this out, would have such a dramatic life. How did she... She went to school, she had a job, she had every extracurricular activity, did charity work. It was... No. Right, I have this theory, right? I'm British, and me and my partner, we watch a lot of American television, because of course a lot of it is extremely excellent. Currently watching Dark Matter, actually. Massive, very good show. Other things like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, True Calling, pretty much anything with Elijah Dushku, Christina Ricci in it. Getting distracted again. I will watch. We have this theory that a lot of American television, and I'm sorry to people who are from America, I don't mean this as an insult. It's almost propaganda. It shows that everyone in America just wants to work. You don't want days off. Why would you want holidays? You need to work. And everybody loves working. Everybody wants a job. And it's true. People should work. People should earn a living. They should make their way in life because nothing is free. That's not how we evolve as a species. That's not how we operate. From hunter-gatherer days to now, that's simply not how it works. You need to pay your dues, pay your way through life. Yes, you need to earn, and the more you work, the more you get. But American television is almost like propaganda. I recently watched an episode of Cold Case where they were talking about where the main character mentioned she works basically 7 days a week. They never take vacation time. It's like they don't want vacation time. And when someone goes on holiday, they have to be forced out of work, and they're still thinking about work when they're not at work. And it's portraying this attitude, this sort of philosophy that work, you need to live to work. Work, life balance, you don't need that. You live to work. You do not work so that you can live. And I know a lot of programs will try and emphasize that point. It's like, no, that's not what you do. That's not why you have a job. You have a job to make your life better, to make your family's life better, to advance yourself and improve yourself. But a lot of the time they show it as like, no. The best people, they just work non-stop all the time. But you really think about it, the most successful, richest, most powerful people, yeah, they probably do work hard, but they get to play hard as well. And it always shows them, they go out of work. No, who's got the energy for that? Even in my 20s, I didn't have the energy for that. Oh, I've been at work all day. Yeah, I'm definitely going to the pub now. Yeah, I'm going to spend several hours in there, get drunk, and then stagger into work. No one's got that kind of energy. Anyway. And especially not a 16-year-old. I mean, she had her own business, everything, by the time she was like 16, 17 years old. It's utterly unbelievable. Now, I get it, suspension of disbelief. She's meant to be a larger-than-life character, but she wasn't portrayed particularly like that. And it annoyed a lot of fans. It annoyed me that her character didn't seem as strong as she should have been. She always needed saving. She basically would have been dead if Clark wasn't there. And it wasn't just once either. It was multiple times, almost every single week. It was the same with Jonathan Kent. I mentioned this in the short. He was always on the verge of bankruptcy. He owned that farm. It had been in his farm for generations. Why did he even have a mortgage? He wouldn't have had a mortgage. He'd have had no payments on that house. He shouldn't have needed to. Why did he not want his wife to work? I'm sorry to go off on a tangent about this, but it really bugged me when watching the show. It's like, why is he losing that farm every goddamn week? But yet his pride gets in the way every time Lex offers help. Not just financial assistance, But other forms of help, aid, it's just turned down. Other farms in the area employ people. He relied basically on Clark's special abilities to get the farm through all of its work. It could get all the chores done in like half an hour, which would take other people days. It was strange. Back to Lana. Right? Lana's character was portrayed wonderfully by Kristen Karuk, and especially when she became Lana Luthor, as I said, she became an absolutely fantastic character, far more interesting, but was really dull in those early seasons because she always needed saving, and she was just kind of boring. That's not the actress's fault, that's your fault, writers. You wrote her badly. But let's carry on around the friend circle. And let's go to Chloe Sullivan, my personal favourite character in the show. I absolutely loved Chloe Sullivan. I had a huge crush on her. I found Alison Mack to be a very beautiful woman. And I certainly thought she was one of the better characters. Certainly one of the better written characters. Sometimes overly ambitious. Crossed the line quite often, but was ultimately a good person. She ends up in her own right to be a superhero. Running Watchtower. Yeah, she doesn't have special abilities, although she does have them temporarily, but seems to lose them. It was never entirely clear. A little ambiguous in the later seasons, but she becomes basically Watchtower, where she helps the other superheroes all around the world organize and work together to fight humanity's enemies collectively. And she does that really, really well. And she uses intelligence and her, reason and logic and somewhat ruthlessness to accomplish this goal. All skill sets. She basically wasn't the physicality like Superman or Green Arrow, but she was smart, she was cunning, she was good at planning, and she was good at organizing. So she took her innate skills, the skill set she could bring to the table, and used them to the best of her abilities. With the proper funding and time and assets, she did that. And again, she ends up marrying Oliver Queen and being really rich, which is also a kind of interesting tail off to the character in the later seasons. Didn't see that one coming, as I recall watching it. The show overall was very hit or miss with a lot of people. Personally, it tapered off towards the end. The last couple of seasons, when they introduced Brainiac, who was played brilliantly by James Masters, Spike from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, if that name sounds familiar. It was played absolutely fantastically by him, and the character generally was a welcome addition to the show. It wasn't in it enough, in my opinion. But then you had other characters like Doomsday, and basically that character was not... It was one season, played again by an actor who didn't really suit the part, but to me wasn't menacing or threatening. Chloe was always trying to help him and save him. It was so blah, I think is the only word I can use to kind of describe that. And it felt like they'd fallen off a cliff. It's like, right, what do we do now? We need to do something. Right, yeah, Doomsday. Bring Doomsday in. What now? All right, yeah. Bring in Zod. Yeah, get Zod. Let's get a load of Kryptonians in. Yeah. What now? Oh, time travel, dimension shifting. Everything they could throw at the board, they threw at it. They brought in Evil Clark from another universe. They bring in, as I said, they brought in Brainiac, and they did that one actually really well. And they bring in various other little characters. And like they bring in obviously they bring in the Phantom Zone, and they have a Phantom that becomes Clark. It takes on his appearance and mimics him for a bit. The Phantoms was sort of the later season's version of the Meteor Freaks. Don't shout at me, that's what they called them in the show. The Meteor Freaks were the people who were meteor infected, as they called them in the later series, who were altered by kryptonite that gave them special abilities. They varied. Actually, I liked that idea, as I think I didn't elaborate enough. I actually really liked all the sort of Monster of the Week episodes where you ended up with Bug Boy, girl who could control the beast. Some of them were ridiculous. Like the controlling the beast ones was ridiculous. But the girl who could teleport, who had a whole redemption arc as well, which was fantastic. The shape-shifting girl, fantastic. As I said, the show did a lot of things really well. It, for me personally, tapered off towards the end. But I'm going to talk about my favourite character in the show. Again, I did a short about this. And that'd be Lionel Luthor, played by the amazing John Glover. His character arc was one of the best in the show. He went from villain, out and out, pure, despicable human being who very likely killed his own parents. He admitted to it. for their insurance money. Maybe his parents deserved it, maybe they didn't. It's a little vague in the show. They may have been abusive or something. He eventually spawned multiple children who he raised in different ways, to see which one came out on top. And I'd say that Tess Mercer and Lex were probably his two most successful children. His character arc, though, when he became bonded with Jor-El for a bit, he saw the error of his ways. His character was so good. He killed Virgil Swan, that was bad, who was played again by Christopher Reeve, who was the original Superman, who was in it a lot less than I realized. I recently rewatched this show, and I thought that Christopher Reeve was in this a lot more. He was only in like 2 episodes. I was shocked. Margot Kidder was also in it, and she was killed off very unceremoniously as well, I should point out, for various behind-the-scenes reasons that don't really matter right now. Disagreements always happens. So Lionel, though, had this whole redemption arc. He eventually becomes Clark's guardian. He knows his secret. He knows he's Kryptonian. He protects that information. He falls in love with his mother, attempts a relationship with her, but they end up, although he's in love with her, it never blossoms into anything else. He eventually is killed by Lex, and even though Lex is like, "Yay, I killed him," you could see it on Lionel's face, both a little bit, probably the old Lionel, I thought, of a little bit of pride in his son for being able to go that far, but also in knowing that he's just took the secret that Lex wanted to the grave, and Lex will never be able to get it. And that was the absolute nail in the coffin for Lex, his ever possible redemption. He had the exact opposite story. He went from what was clearly a good person being manipulated and twisted by his father into embracing that side, even when his father realized what he'd done to Lex. Lionel realized what he was turning Lex into. He was turning him into the monster that he was, and potentially something far worse. And he realized far too late. And he tried to undo the damage that was done, but it was a case of there's no repairing this anymore. He's beyond repair, he's beyond saving. Even though they did bring him back in that really terrible way at the end, where he kills his sister and then loses his memory. It's ridiculous. But the ending of the show, you don't even really see Clark in his Superman suit, which is another big complaint. He's in it like once, and he's in orbit of the planet flying, and he barely even flies. Superman doesn't really fly in this show, if you've not properly watched it. But if you haven't watched it, you should go and watch it, even though I just blowed out loads of spoilers. I am going to share now a couple of things that I particularly find grating about this show. And it's again, the last couple of seasons, I find them very tedious. When the show first aired, I think I stopped watching around season 7, so 8, 9, and 10. I think I needed to properly watch. I think I watched a bit of 8, got bored and just stopped. And I've had to rewatch it recently. And found that I found those last few seasons just as dull and uninteresting as I did originally. But I managed to power through and watch them. And yeah, there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff with this show. I think, again, the characters are done very well. I think the character arcs and storylines are done very well. There are a few duds. Pete was a dud of a character. There was potential, but they didn't do enough with him. Lionel, excellent. Lex, excellent, although he was, again, ruined a little bit towards the end. Brainiac, done really well. Clark, done really well. Chloe Sullivan, done really well. Lois Lane, actually probably one of the best characters. From her first introduction right up to the end, probably one of the very best characters this show had to offer. And again, Erica Durance did that character a lot of justice. Green Arrow, fantastic. Hawkman, fantastic. A lot of these characters, the peripherals, done really well. In the later seasons, they dragged in a lot of other DC superheroes like Aquaman, and although they never call him the Flash, it was clearly the Flash. It was the Flash. And they bring in all these characters and the Wonder Twins and all kinds of stuff. And they do them justice. They do these characters really well. Even though a lot of them are one-offs, and they're clearly set-ups to see if they could do spin-off shows, which were attempted. They had all kinds of ideas about doing spin-offs from this, but never successfully managed to actually make one. But it's not an issue directly with the show. My problem is a behind-the-scenes issue. It's not the writing or anything. It's actually... Well, let's cover the actor Sam Jones III. First of all, spent time in prison. Criminal. And I get it. People deserve a second chance. And it's minor. It was drug offences. I think a bit of dealing. Nothing severely major, kind of but it seems to be something that was in the water in this show. Because if any of you haven't looked up Alison Mack, who played Chloe Sullivan, again, one of my favourite characters, and certainly had some of the best storylines and was very well portrayed by Alison Mack, and I had a huge crush on her, although I am told, reliably, by multiple people, including my current partner, I have some kind of crazy dar, and I have terrible, terrible taste in partners, and yeah, I may not be the best catcher in the world myself, but I do seem to attract, or at least be attracted to, rather, maybe not the best people for me, shall we say. And I really liked Alison Mack, and I learned about the whole NXIVM cult thing that she became a part of, that we won't go massively into, but things happened in that cult that I can't say on YouTube, because it'll get this video taken down, demonetized, all kinds of stuff. But there was a lot of graping going on, and trafficking, and various other things, including branding, torture, basically, of young girls by her. She was heavily involved in it. And it's not even allegedly. I don't even need to put an allegedly in here. She spent time in prison for it. She didn't spend enough time in prison, in my personal opinion. People's lives were ruined, destroyed. Now, don't get me wrong. Keith Raniere, who ran the cult, he's a monster. I know that these ones do come with allegedlys because I know that it's still being investigated. People died. And allegedly, massive emphasis on the allegedly, he may have been involved. There is absolutely no evidence she was involved. But nonetheless, just being part of that, helping to recruit, what happened to all those girls that were part of that is absolutely disgusting. There's no forgiveness for me for that at all. I can't abide it. I can't justify it. I have a daughter myself, and it's vile to me what was happening at NXIVM. It's utterly repugnant. It's disgusting. And she was part of that. Not just part of it, but she was near the top. And she was part of it while in the show, trying to get other people from the show to be involved. So that's made it very difficult for me to rewatch the show, because I'm not the most emotional person. I may have mentioned this in another video. I'm quite autistic. But certain things will trigger me, and that one really triggered me. I find I can't separate looking at her, and I know what she is. It's like, nope. I watched, again, Cold Case is another show I'm watching currently. And I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here, so forgive me. But there was an actor, I've forgotten his name, he was a bit actor, he was just in one episode. And he played a white skinhead American in the show. I can't say the name again, because I'll get demonetized and this video taken down, probably, maybe. Allegedly. And yeah, whatever. He was perfectly fine in the show. He's playing a part. Can't judge an actor for a part they play, because obviously he's playing a bad person. Alan Rickman, lovely human being, played Hans Gruber. Hans Gruber was evil. Played that role so well. Point is, you can't judge an actor by the character that they're portraying, because that's not who they are. They are acting. And he was acting as a bad guy character. And as I usually do when I'm watching something, I start scrolling through IMDb and some other sites, gathering up trivia and information, because I fanatically absorb this kind of information. Nothing useful stays in my head, no. Star Trek trivia, Star Wars, Battlestar Galactica, all sticks. Someone tells me they want a holiday at work, I have to write that down. Yeah, so anyway. I learnt scrolling through the IMDb, I was like, I wonder what that actor's been in. Has he been in anything else I've watched? Because he played a good role. I liked him, so I thought I'll look him up. I got him up on IMDb. I was like, oh my god, he's sadly passed away. That's really sad. I even said to my partner, I said, he's dead now. He died at 28. That's sad. It was like in 2012, I believe he died. And I was like, that's kind of sad. And then, as usual, because I'm curious, how did he die? why? It says, oh, he died in a fall. I'm like, okay, that's sad. It's really random as well. It's like so out of the blue. It's like what happened with Anton Yelchin being killed by his car's brakes failing and him being run over by his own vehicle. Very sad. I thought that's really sad. But then I read something in his description on IMDb, and it said basically the circumstances around his death. They didn't elaborate, but they said were not good. I was like, well, how are they not good? It was just a fall. So I did a little more digging, looked him up directly, what had happened. And turns out he had jumped over the fence where he lived, attacked his neighbour, attacked a contractor who was doing work on the house, jumped back over the fence. His 81-year-old landlady had come round to the apartment, and the two were arguing, so he strangled her and allegedly, I don't really think I need an allegedly there, but we'll put one in anyway, allegedly, according to the research I did, he then unalived her. Then he jumped off the roof, either to unalive himself or it was an accident. It's not entirely clear. It was ruled an accidental death. And I just looked at it and I was like, all right, I don't care. I don't care if this guy's dead. I don't care anymore. Initially it was sad. I thought, oh, well, it's sad, die at 28. I was like, that's young. That's really sad. And I was like, oh, no, I'm not sad anymore. Not after he did that. No, I don't care. Screw him. And it's kind of the same with Alison Mack. I just don't care. I get angry watching the show when I see her in it. Partly at myself, because I think I still find her attractive. I still think she's pretty. I can't help it. Physically, I find her attractive. And I think it's the personality of Chloe Sullivan I like. Not, obviously, the personality of a person that did all those horrible things that she did. But as my partner will tell me, I do have terrible, terrible taste. And that was... it's a thing that puts me off the show, and it's why I don't rewatch it very often. So that's why I did a lot of shorts over this last few months about Smallville, because I finally thought I want to rewatch this show, because I remember really loving Michael Rosenbaum's Lex Luthor. I really liked Tom Welling's take on Superman. I liked all the guest characters like Dean Cain and, like I say, Margot Kidder and Christopher Reeve and all the others who appear in this. The original Jimmy Olsen's in it and everything. And I liked the idea of the meteor freaks. Again, apologies for the terminology. It's what they call them in the show. I like this. And also that theme song is now on my Spotify playlist. From rewatching the show, it's like Save Me by Remy Zero. I think they're a defunct band now. But it actually appears in the show. They even appear in the show. They're in like a bar or something which has a live band, and it's Remy Zero playing, and they do the entire song. I was like, okay, that was on purpose, wasn't it? That just happened. It is overall, in my opinion, a very good show. It's very enjoyable, but sometimes, for me personally, and it is me personally, trying to separate the out-of-universe stuff from the in-universe is difficult. I can do it for the most part, and I did power through and I got through it, and I still really like the character of Chloe Sullivan. I don't know if they have, because again, I'm not a big DC reader. I don't know if that character's ever been made canon in the actual comics. I know that as the multiverse theory, because obviously she is canon via the multiverse, because we had the Crisis on Infinite Earths and we revisited that universe, but it's not relevant really to this. I don't know if she's another Harley Quinn that they've ever made canonized, because she is a really good character. And what Alison Mack did in her personal life off screen isn't really relevant to the show. If there's actually a podcast done by Michael Rosenbaum where he talked about this a little bit. He, like many of the other cast, him, Tom Welling and others, they try not to talk about it. But he has spoken about it, and he talked about a few weird encounters he had with her. And again, all this stuff kind of rattles around in my head whenever I rewatch the show, and it does make it difficult for me to watch it. I don't know about you guys out there, but it does for me. It makes it a little difficult to absorb the show as an entity in and of itself when I'm thinking about what I knew she was doing off screen. And it's horrifying. It's really horrible. If you don't want to look it up, don't. But if you are curious, just look up Nixium. It was a cult. It's still around, actually. I'm hoping it's not still up to its same past activities. I imagine it's being watched. But it's actually a reason why one of the characters was killed off in Battlestar Galactica as well. She was part of it, and they kicked her off the show because she was part of it. They didn't want her on the show anymore. Yeah, so overall, it's a very enjoyable show. I can normally separate out of universe stuff. I actually have a general rule in life. I try not to get to know anything about actors and producers and things if I can avoid it. I don't want to know them as people. I know a few actors, and I used to work very, very passively in the media industry a long time ago. And I've met a lot of like behind the scenes people. I know a few here and there. And they're mostly decent people. They're mostly fine. But allegedly, with actors, just sometimes they're a little weird. Some of them. And I've known a few. And I even have an actress actually, who's a friend of mine. She's a stage actress. And she actually turned around to me and she went, "Don't ever trust an actor. Don't ever trust anything they say. Because they're trained to lie. They are professional liars. They're very good at it. And don't ever trust them." And that was from an actor. That's a quote. I'm not going to say who said it because she's not famous or anything. She just does stage and she's local to where I am. But she knows a few bigger names and stuff. And she's like, yeah, don't. Just don't. But that brings me to the end of this little, very long video on Smallville. I don't do a lot of videos on Smallville. Not because I don't want to cover it, but this is mostly Star Trek channel. I just every now and again like to cover something else. And I've wanted to do some Smallville content. And I considered doing like a few short episodes on it, like covering some of the media infected or touching on Lionel and Lex Luthor, their relationship, the character arcs of the major characters. I've touched them a little bit here. I don't want to go into major detail because I could do a full video on every single one. And they'd all be great, and they really would be. And I know this show is so worth your time if you've never seen it. It is such a good show. It, I think, has aged mostly well. I will say, I will stand by that opinion that I think there's a little bit of an incel side of Clark's character here and there. But it's very minor, and they mostly rub it out later. But there's a little bit of it. It's there. I see it every now and again. It's a bit like when I go back and rewatch Buffy and you're like, Xander, what the hell? Oz, I remember liking you. I still like them, but like, really? Shut up. Anyway, I don't really cover it just because I don't watch it often enough. And as much as I love the show, and again, some of the performances, particularly that of Michael Rosenbaum, Tom Welling, even Alison Max, I don't like the actress, but the character and her way she portrayed her extremely well, and a lot of the others, especially a lot of the sort of, I won't call them bit characters, but the sort of side characters, the peripherals, like Green Arrow, played by Justin Hartley, who was also in an episode of Cold Case I watched recently, played the bad guy. Literally like 2 nights ago, I think I watched that episode from recording this, so it would have been like the 26th of January, 25th of January, something like that. I watched it, and he was in it. I was like, oh, awesome. He's in Smallville. I was like, that's kind of how I view it. And I was like, oh, he's the bad guy. Ugh. Not used to seeing him as the bad guy. I like it. Anyway, he does it so well. He was so charismatic and charming. Anyway, it is such a good show. It is so well made. And although it tapers off a little bit towards the end, it's worth persevering through to get to what is some divisively, perhaps as an opinion, an unsatisfying ending to the show. In fact, I think the one in Crisis on Infinite Earths is worse. The idea that he's given up his powers makes no sense. Kryptonians can't just not have their powers anymore anyway, so he's got to be suppressing them in some way. I know they can always get them back, because that's in the comics. They can always get them back. It's so stupid that he would have given up the powers of a god to raise his kids. His kids are going to have those powers, for God's sakes. Anyway, I didn't like the crossover in Crisis on Infinite Earths. I did like the crossover to the Birds of Prey universe they did in it, though, which also had Shamar Moore in it. He's awesome. I liked that show. That got cancelled way before its time. 2002. Would have been contemporary to this show. I don't think they were considered part of the same universe, though. Pretty sure they weren't. Anyway, what do you guys think of this if you've made it all the way to the end of this, I really do appreciate it, because that means watch time is way up. This is now officially the single longest video I've ever made outside of a supercut. So there's that. If you have enjoyed this video, please like, share, subscribe, comment down below, and hit the bell notification icon to keep up to date with more episodes, possibly in the future, about Smallville. Let me know in the comment section down below if you would like me to cover some of the characters. I'd probably like to cover the Media Infected, because I think as both villains and as interesting sort of additional characters, they're well worth exploring. And I'd like to do some character explorations of characters such as Lex, who was hands down, him, Lionel, and I'd say Chloe were probably my three favourite characters in the show. They were the three best. I think they were... all the others, they're well written, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying the others are not good. Me personally, in my opinion, those three characters are my favourites. They have the best storylines, the best arcs. They're the best... I'm not going to say the best acted necessarily, but they're certainly the best portrayals of those characters I've seen in the various different Superman medias. With that said, I am going to bring this stupidly long video now to an end. And if you've made it all to the end and enjoyed it, I thank you for watching. I'm probably going to make this one a podcast now, just because of how long it's ended up being. But again, if you want to see shorter form videos that will cover some of these, let me know in the comment section down below. And with that out of the way, with that all said, bye bye and have a great day.